it has been so long since season 1 of Invincible. You know how long it's been? This show aired opposite Falcon and Winter Soldier. Do you remember that? No one was watching Invincible, and those of us that were, the few of us, were like, you gotta watch this show! But it ran a little longer than Falcon and Winter Soldier. So once Falcon and Winter Soldier wrapped, everybody binged Invincible and was on the Invincible train by the time that amazing season 1 finale aired, which made quite the impression. But then the show squandered it, I feel, to some degree by taking so long to return. But I gotta tell you, I was like, can I get back into this show? It's been such a long time. There's so much other superhero content right now. But for me, it just took one episode. I was like, this show is great. And I'm wondering if you got right back into it as well. Although I was able to binge all 4 episodes of season 2, part 1, and it was a glorious experience. But this is, going weekly. And we'll see if it can, I wonder if people will wait to binge it once again. I think, again, the finale of, part 1 is pretty awesome. And we'll probably maybe get people talking again, just like the season finale of season 1 did so much for the show. So I wonder if we'll have to wait 4 weeks for this show to really click. But the reason it clicked, especially as an animated series, is that it's such a fresh adult take on superheroes, like The Boys is, also from producer Seth Rogen for Prime Video. And also, it came out during the pandemic, where everybody was stuck at home, and so we needed stuff to do. And not only did we watch all these shows, but I was so taken with Invincible that I went and read 15 years of Invincible comics right after, and I read them in less than a month. I burned through them because they were so good. But that was so long ago, 2 years, that I forgot a lot of the smaller parts of the comic. I mean, that's the problem. I usually try to do my research right before the next season drops, or whatever I'm going to be covering is dropping, because it's hard to retain all that. But one thing I retained is what happened to Omni Man after he left Earth. And oh boy, I'm happy to say that again, in these 4 episodes, they start to at least cover that a little bit, and it does not disappoint. So I'm very excited to talk to you about that. And they got Omni Man in this episode as well, which we'll discuss. But as I said, 1 episode, I was back in it. And something else that occurred to me while I was watching this second season, and I was like, this is so good. And I discussed this in my Gen V season 1 breakdown as well, which is up. Please go check that out as well. A show that's also kind of been a little bit of a slow burn. But I think that shows like The Boys and Gen V, and then here Invincible, all from Seth Rogen, are undercutting Marvel and DC because they are free to tell not just more adult stories, but more sophisticated ones. And they can take risks because that's their calling card. The whole reason they were created first as comics and then later on as shows, because they're commentaries on the superhero genre without the restraints of upholding billion-dollar franchises. So unlike Marvel and DC, which in fact become even more restricted the more successful they become, because the companies see them as so valuable, they're like, oh, don't risk it. Success doesn't hurt these shows because, again, the whole reason for their existence is to push the edge of the envelope. But I also think credit is due to Seth Rogen, who's kind of turning himself with these shows and even the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles into kind of like a rogue Kevin Feige, right? And that he's a fan of the source material. Well, early days Kevin Feige. Kevin Feige, of course, has run into choppy waters. He steered right into him. But anyway, Seth Rogen also has, so far at least, insisted on being very faithful to the material that he's adapting, which I think also helps. I also think it's interesting that Seth Rogen, I'm a fan of Seth Rogen's comedy. Sometimes he's gone a little bit too far for me, but for the most part, I really enjoy his work. And I think his comedy has a similar tone as well, and that it also pushes the edge of the envelope while at the same time having a lot of heart and also commentary. Think about like Sausage Party. That was a really fascinating commentary on organized religion, in fact. He really snuck that in there. And I think those qualities are in The Boys and Gen V and also Invincible. And so I think that's great. Deadpool, as I've said, might end up being an exception to the big business problem, and that the character is very meta, and that also Disney is allowing him to stay R-rated, but that's because of another excellent driving force, an actor-producer Ryan Reynolds, who fought for that R rating. Tom Hiddleston tried really hard with Loki, but it hasn't. Somehow it seems not to have worked out. Even Tom Hiddleston couldn't survive what's going on with Marvel right now. So maybe Ryan Reynolds will share a similar fate. He is hoping he doesn't. All right, but back to Invincible. Now, I'm not just talking about pushing the edge of the envelope in terms of shock value. That's more The Boys and Gen V, although I don't think that's totally fair to those shows either. They're very, very smart as well. But there's nothing... The Boys and Gen V doesn't have the artistry of Invincible. There were beautiful moments in season 1, and there are some beautiful moments right here in episode 1 of the new season. 3 fantastic small moments that really spoke to me this episode, and I'm going to share them with you right now, and I'd love to hear what really stood out to you, like the smaller moments like this. But the way at the beginning the clouds are impacted by the force of Invincible and the Immortals fight, almost poetic. From that far away. You don't know what's going on even. You're just like, isn't that neat? But then you zoom in for the violence of what's happening and how dangerous it is. But I thought that was incredible. I love that. That was really cool. And also, when Mark transports that ambulance right to the hospital. And it's such a simple idea and so effective, but I've never seen it depicted in that way. I've seen superheroes pick up ambulances before, but we never see what the effect of that is from the inside medic perspective. That, like, you're at the hospital. And while that's happening, they're working on the patient really quickly, but, valuable time isn't lost in trying to get there. And it was fantastic. It was really, really, I guess that's the thing. It's like a really interesting and unique and new perspective. I thought it was, and also that, the humans are kind of like in the mix. They're not just, have a front row seat. And the medics are doing stuff too. It was great. I've seen a lot of superhero stories because I read comics too. And I love, again, it's difficult to keep it fresh at this point. And I think, these shows are doing that. I also like the moment where Mark, still trying to recover emotionally from his fight with his father, decides that his anger is getting the best of him, and he decides to walk away from that fight. And he can do that because the GDA, Global Defense Agency soldiers, show up, and they can take care of those supervillains. And again, I like a world that's not totally dependent on superheroes, where the humans can step up. And I think that makes it more interesting. The superheroes have more of a choice. And there's more of an interesting equal dynamic going on. I just really like it. And, again, in other comic book shows, those soldiers would be, worthless. They wouldn't be able to do anything. But here, they can handle it. Mark can walk away. And so I thought that was great. On that note, I was trying to think of how I would describe Omni Man's fighting style, because it's very distinct. And I settled on efficient. Oh, it's perfect. Not just in that, and I wonder how you would describe it, but not just that Omni Man always works to end a fight as soon as possible. Usually they're sparring for entertainment purposes. But why wouldn't you try to end the fight as soon as possible? The longer a fight goes on, the greater the likelihood that you're going to get hurt. So of course it makes beautiful, perfect sense. But he also uses as little physical movement as possible. Again, he's very efficient. He doesn't expend more energy than he needs to. And it's really cool to watch because it not only makes so much sense, but it's a different approach on superheroing. So it makes it really new and fresh. And on the flip side of that, I love this. Cecil Stedman, who runs the GDA, is equally efficient in what he does. But also, J.K. Simmons and Walton Goggins in their voice performances are very efficient. It's great. And on that note, both characters are very efficient in their logic and in the direct way that they speak to Mark. They're both very direct with him, which I think, obviously sometimes the conversations aren't great. But I think Mark's lucky. I think I always prefer the direct approach. And I think it makes them a really good pair of father figures. And I think that also makes sense why Cecil would kind of step in for Omni Man when it comes to a father figure for Mark. Although, of course, he runs the GDA, so they're interacting for that reason. But I think that's kind of why Mark is pulled towards him, because I do think he has similar qualities to his father. But I guess obviously there's a goodness there that Omni Man didn't have. I don't want to give too much away. It's very interesting. All All right, so how do we start the episode? With a multiverse. And I know we're all sick of the multiverse at this point, but in this situation, it's a clever way to be able to bring Omni Man back at the start of season 2, even though in our storyline, our main storyline, he's left Earth and disappeared. But here they're able to open with him because we're in a different universe. And by the way, Omni Man is getting ready to debut in Mortal Kombat November 9th as part of Combat Pack, just as season 2 part 1 gets underway. Synergy! Oh, I love it. And we learn from Angstrom Levy, voiced by the excellent Sterling K. Brown. Remember when Sterling K. Brown was on the cusp of superstardom? But then he ended up never taking off. I think he took on maybe one bad project too many. But I love the guy, and he's a great vocal choice here. But his superpower is to travel between universes. And he tells us that in most universes, Mark sided with his father and agreed to overthrow Earth. So that makes our story, our main story, very special. So we get this chilling opening that not only has Omni Man in it, but alternate universe versions of some characters that we already know. And that's always fun. Although it's getting less fun the more everybody does it. But you've got Robot, where Rudy has not only the robot body operating independently, but he's out and about in his original misshapen body. That line that Omni Man said to him, whoo, again, Omni Man cuts right to it, physically and emotionally. And then also a G.I. Jane apocalyptic version of Adam Eve. Speaking of efficient, Mark doesn't kill her, but neutralizes her by paralyzing her by snapping her neck. A move Omni Man notes Mark perfected by practicing on protesters. As I said, chilling. But this fate for Adam Eve, in fact, mirrors, in a way, what happened to her mother, which makes it even more disturbing. It's also similar to Omni Man referring to his wife as a pet. Of course, no one's ever going to forget that. And Mark here, like his father, has his own plaything. The way you would play with, the way a deranged child would play with a pet. It's really disturbing. And, later in the episode, Mark says, I always wanted to grow up to be like his father. And in many of the multiverses, he did. Side note, I hope you checked out the Adam Eve origin special that came out during the summer, actually during Comic-Con, because it was excellent. It was so good. And I think a lot of people didn't pay attention to it because, again, it's been so long and it was just a one-off. I wonder, I would say that breaking season 2 into 2 parts was a mistake, but the 4 episodes are so amazing, I think it'll be okay. But anyway, that standalone episode was fantastic. If you didn't see it, circle back and watch it now. But that special highlights a drawback that's also on display here, and that is the distractingly cheap background animation. I'm talking both the backgrounds and like the extras, the animated extras. But the show manages to make up for it with incredible action sequences. That's where they spend all their money. And by the way, Adam Eve's highway battle in her origin special is one of the best superhero battles I have ever seen, animated or live action. I wish live action superhero battles were that well directed. I don't know if they can afford to do it. I think that's where animation maybe has a little bit of an edge today. You would think like people would prefer live action, but they still can't. The flair and animated action sequences for adults, animation for adults, we saw it on display also in the Last Airbender and Legend of Korra shows. They still haven't reached that level, I think, for the most part in live action. But then also really gripping storylines. So like very good shock value and, as I said, artistry. So you're like, even though the show at some points is, again, distractingly cheap, hard yikes, it more than makes up for it in other areas so that you're still like, this is great. But what do you think? It occasionally takes me out of it. I'm like, come on, you can't afford a little bit more than that? That's ridiculous. Isn't this a hit show? So this alternate universe is Angstrom Levy, who does not have powers. In fact, only one Angstrom Levy does. But that guy uses his powers to pull this variant into the main Invincible universe, the one that our story follows. And that's why, by the way, they cut to that one variant later on. I was like, why are they cutting to that one dude in particular? That's because he's the variant from the opening sequence. And I think they could have made that a little bit more clear. But anyway, the main Angstrom Levy's plan is that since every universe has figured out some problem, He's going to absorb all of his variants' knowledge so that he can create a utopia where all the problems are solved in a single universe. I mean, I guess Angstrom Levy never heard of the butterfly effect, but he's going for it anyway. And speaking of things going wrong, ultimately, Invincible interrupts the process. And not wanting Invincible's blood on his hands, but hey, man, Levy called in the Mauler variants. What did he think was going to happen? For a guy who insists on seeing the big picture, he's not very good at thinking ahead. I'd be like, that was totally your fault, dude. But like a lot of villains, he doesn't want to accept responsibility for it. Although interestingly, I guess that's what makes Mark very heroic. He's trying to accept responsibility for things that aren't even his fault. But I can see why he would think maybe to some degree they were. All right, so anyway, the process is interrupted, and Levi, as we discover in the post-credit scene, most episodes this season have a post-credit scene, so make sure you stick around. But he's horribly disfigured, and he blames Invincible for his accident. Plus, on top of that, he has the memories, or at least part of them, of all the other variants, who of course come from universes where Invincible and Omni Man were hardcore villains. So now Invincible has his first very own arch enemy. Aw, he's getting all grown up. So he's moving on from his dad and starting his own independent superhero life, and that's very much what this episode is actually about. Now, I think Angstrom Levy starts out as a really cool character. I mean, he's got Sterling K. Brown's voice, right? But I think by the end of the episode, he's a lot less cool. I have similar problems here that I did with him in the comic. And speaking of the comics, what I remember, I don't want to give too much away, but I felt he became so evil as a character that there was no way to empathize with him at all. I mean, we'll see if the show can maybe fix that, because I felt that was a problem, because complex villains are more interesting. I mean, you're like, that guy's just awful. We just need to get rid of him immediately. And then also, as I said, I think cool villains are more fun. It's real bad. I can see why he's upset with Invincible. All right, so I also like funny villains, like the Mauler twins. Great Kevin Richardson doing the voice. Great banter in prison. I mean, this character just keeps on giving. Love it. And then also, by the way, that's Duplicate's brother that we see once again, who must be a villain because he's in prison, and his name is Multipole. Oh, I love these names. Duplicate, Multipole. Oh, they're so great. This show shines even with the little things. But my favorite part of the Angstrom Levy storyline was showing that superheroes would realistically be like first responders, because Invincible shows up on the scene and he has no idea what's going on. So often in most comic books and movies, the superhero shows up and is like, oh, I know what's happening. I can totally tell. But I love that Invincible's like, oh, it's some light up Christmas tree that's all sparkly. And I like that Cecil's just like, shut it down. Now, in the end, after things definitely go south, Invincible questions those orders. I mean, not forcibly, but to himself. And also, he's in a bad place right now. I think more casualties. We're not good for Mark at this moment. He's not fully recovered, obviously, from what happened in Chicago with his dad. But I gotta say, I agree with Cecil. Angstrom Levy and the Mauler variants, they put themselves in that situation. Now, the Angstrom Levy variants, those are victims. But I think that it would have been devastating for Angstrom Levy to gain all that knowledge. That had to be stopped. And I wonder how much knowledge he did get. The real failure in this scenario is the Immortal, who was supposed to find survivors. I mean, Angstrom Levy should be in a GDA holding cell. That's who really dropped the ball here, in my opinion. All right, so let's talk Guardians of the Globe, both as a refresher and to address the new developments for the team. So, team members, new roster. Robot, aka Rudy, who last season built himself a new teenage body, so he'd be an appropriate date for Monster Girl, herself stuck in a teenage body, who he has feelings for, and you're beginning to see some of that flirtation already. Although now, as she points out, he's actually in the field instead of controlling his robot body remotely. So now he's in danger, and that means he has to deal with fear. There's Rexplode, a lot of fun. Again, Duplicate. And just as a reminder, Kates can be killed, but as long as there's just one left, that's okay, because they're all connected. So you just need one to survive a battle. It's not like there's an original and that has to be the one that survives. Just one. Any of the ones has to make it out. Shrinking Ray, basically Ant-Man, Black Samson, and now the Immortal is brought back on the team to lead. Omni Man, of course, killed him in season 1, but as we saw, he's immortal and was able to be brought back. Something has to be left to regenerate. I think it's the head. Thus, the kill in the opening, alternate universe, where Mark, by the way, I thought that was a good callback, uses some of his dad's moves. And then also Bulletproof joins the team. And again, I don't want to give away any story points, but let me just say, keep an eye on this character. And I like their flying vehicle, obviously a take on the Fantastic Car, although this one to me seems like a better ride, because parts of it are like a motorcycle, and I want duplicate seat. That seems to me like the best spot on that vehicle. Where would you want to sit? I mean, that to me, I guess also driving it would be cool, but I like that one. That one seems great. As for Mark's personal life, his mother is having, understandably, a tough time. In a way, she's a superhero widow, like Red Rush's widow, but her husband is not actually dead, and he's responsible for the death of a lot of other superheroes, which have created the other widows. Also, Omni-Man called her a pet, and I think that would be a blow to anyone's self-esteem. Debbie has a lot more to do than she did in the comics here, but that's because she's voiced by Sandra Oh, and you don't waste Sandra Oh. I can't decide if she's pulling the storyline down a little bit. Again, I've seen all 4 episodes, and I think they do some interesting stuff with her, but I don't know how interested people are in Debbie. But I think that does give the show some balance. So, and maybe while I'm not as interested in Debbie's story, maybe some of you are. I'd be interested to know if that's the case. And Mark is going to college with his girlfriend, just as he'd hoped, and that's going to be a big part of at least the first part of season 2, because it gets him out of the house and even more into his own space that his father didn't define. Because, at home, he has all these memories of his father. So it's really about Mark, carving out his own space away from and independent of his father. But it's also going to leave Debbie even more adrift. That's right. We're going to keep spending time with Debbie. Although I have to say, it's nice that he wanted to make dinner for his mom, but I'm surprised. I don't think Mark and Debbie have a great relationship, which is also, I think, is interesting, but I also think hurts the interest in her character, because Mark doesn't seem that interested in her. So I think it makes the audience a little bit less interested in her. Debbie ain't getting no respect from anybody. All right, so that's my breakdown of Season 2, Part 1, Episode 1. Oh, man, they're really chopping this up. But it's so good. Are you right back into it, too? And what do you think of Invincible compared to other superhero stories that are out right now? Share your thoughts. And also, what do you think about with, coming right on the heels of Gen V? Is it all too much of the same? I mean, maybe we'll get eventually burned out on this, too. But right now, I'm really enjoying it. All right, share your thoughts down below. Subscribe today. And, of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.